Yes, hello, welcome, and thank you all. We have an active agenda today with our panelists sitting here in Denmark and the UK, as well as you listeners joining us from across the globe. And we're here to talk about how to demonstrate measurable results from digital investments. Today we'll be addressing the issues that matter most to our listeners today, especially as we can see here, how to set and measure KPIs. We will also have some live polling, and we look forward to your responses and we'll be speaking directly to your answers. So if you're just joining us today and you're not aware of who we are, who is Ignicio? Well, we're a technology company working exclusively in the life sciences since all the way back in 2001. And as you can see here, we sit as a technology partner in a cozy pocket of direct engagement channels that include face-to-face, approved email, microsites, and remote. And today we'll be addressing capabilities on our own platform, as well as others listed here on a typical technology map for the life sciences. And the person you're hearing from today here is this handsome gentleman who ties his own bow ties. I'll be hosting this discussion here today, and joined with me in the UK is James. James is a senior manager at Black Dot Consulting and delivers services and solutions that help transform the customer experience and accelerate growth. James focuses on strategic analysis, customer engagement, and digital transformation for marketing, sales, and service functions. Having worked in a variety of markets across sectors, James has helped multiple clients on large-scale transformation programs from strategy through to execution. And he's previously had leading roles in Capgemini, for example. Good afternoon, James. How's it looking in London?
Afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's looking a little bit rainy, but nothing different there.
All right. And also joining us from a different part of the UK, we have Phil Madden, Vice President of Strategy and Business Transformation at Bionicle. Bionicle is, of course, a global healthcare provider that helps clients transform and deliver strategies and outsource services, including multi-channel customer engagement and remote contact center services. Prior to joining Bionicle, Phil had previously had leading positions at AstraZeneca and Novartis for more than 15 years. Good afternoon, Phil. How's it looking in your part of the UK?
Good afternoon. Very similar to James. Quite wet, but we're used to that.
All right. And last but not least, we have Lars Meinke here, Chief Executive Officer here at Ignicio. And he works closely with pharma and medical device companies around the world to maximize value that digital technologies can provide to HCPs, payers, and patients. Lars has had previous leading roles in a number of Scandinavian tech companies, including Apsys and NetNames. Good afternoon, Lars, and how's it looking in Copenhagen?
Good afternoon, Will. Thanks. It's looking grey and rainy, just as the UK actually.
All right. Well, we hope this webinar is going to bring a little bit of sunshine to those, and those of you out there in other parts of the globe that are enjoying some sunshine, we're all quite jealous of you. So I'm going to start this off with a study by numbers and a bit of a case study. And so the first figure that we have here is 67. And in terms of 67%, what we're talking about is this was a key performance indicator in discussing the uptake in HCPs from accessing remote. "40 seconds. 40 seconds is the average time for a participant in this case study to be able to join a remote call. And finally, 4.3 out of 5, a rep satisfaction score. Distinct from a net promoter score, but this is a KPI that was quite important to our partner here in this case. And each one of these kinds of KPIs, and this is going to be a theme that we're speaking to today, is owned by a different stakeholder. What I will be focusing on a bit in terms of Ignicio is this middle one here, 40 seconds. But these other two KPIs are going to be quite important to another member that's sitting on our panel today, because of course we're talking about our case study with Bionicle. And our support for Bionicle here in this case as a call provider was to be able to bring our technology to their call centers so that they could reach doctors with remote presentations and overcome firewalls and other medical IT systems. So by applying our remote technology, we made it convenient for doctors to join remote presentations, even when there were computers that would blocking access links. So what was a key indicator for success for us on that end goes to us as a technology partner in developing the product further. And another means in which we do that was by interviewing our users quite closely, understanding in the case of Bionicle what was the daily work of the people who were using remote engagement, and being able to ask them questions as to what made their calls better. And taking that 40-second number again, and focusing on that as our performance indicator, we went through with a development in our pipeline to bring a Meet Now link. And so what was so key for Bionicle to be able to move quickly from a call to a remote detailing session was having a short, clear, plain URL that could be spoken plainly and that could circumvent firewalls. So this came through as a result of our collaboration with them and an understanding for their specific user case. And through other interviews with our partners using the remote channel, we've enhanced the content experience. So understanding users like Bionicle as a CSO with a variety of presentation materials that they work with, and with groups that include MSLs and others who applied a wide variety of materials in various formats. We have allowed for basic presentation materials, including PDFs, PowerPoints, Word docs, presentation materials that are typically not very web ready or very web friendly. We've enhanced this experience so that our clients can be able to use the materials that they have on hand in the most web fashion forward available today. So in that discussion of this 40 seconds that became a quite important criteria for us, we'll have some reflections from Phil from Bionicle as to some of these other KPIs as they applied to his case. But for you listeners out there, we're getting to our first polling question. And so we'll be speaking to how are you benefiting from a digital go-to-market today? So I'm opening up our poll here and launching it here. And so for you users at home, please go ahead and answer among the multiple choice questions. We'll be looking to your responses and be speaking to your answers to be able to determine what's the most important thing for our public out here today. We're going to keep this poll open for a bit more. We've got 30% of you responding here. Thank you for interacting and being part of this interactive session. This is always exciting with a live audience. And so for benefiting from a digital go-to-market day. And here we're going to close the poll down. All right. And let's share those results. All right. So we can see in how are you benefiting from a digital go-to-market today that the majority of you fine listeners are sitting with digital sales tools that engage multiple touch points. And so when we're talking about this, I'm thinking this comes very closely to what James is working with at Black Dot. Is this something that you recognize? Is the discussion of multiple digital touch points important in your discussion strategy with your clients, James?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not a surprise at all to see that we've got 26% there saying basic foundations. I think a lot of organisations are working with a number of different sales tools and trying to engage people via multiple touch points. What I think is interesting is, actually, we ran a survey last year across health science organisations, which showed that I think most organisations are now sold on the concept of digital, if you like, and they've kind of embarked on some kind of transformation to work towards really digitalizing their go-to-market model. But what we found is actually it's a minority that are actually achieving results. So I think it's very easy to say now, okay, great, our go-to-market model needs to be digital. And I think it's very easy to gain agreement at a conceptual level about digital. But when it comes to actually doing what it takes to implement transformation and realize results, the reality is that there aren't that many people doing it. So, I mean, it would be interesting to know with the different people we've got responding to the poll here, what the different sales tools are and what the different touch points are. What we've seen in the market is that most organizations are trying to sprinkle a bit of digital on their various customer facing functions because they know that they should. So maybe they've invested in a CRM, as we can see in the poll question there. Maybe they've got a few different sales tools. Maybe they're doing some e-detailing. I think people are broadly aware in the life science industry that they need to offer personalized customer experiences akin to what we're used to in the consumer world. But I think the reality is today, most are still not quite sure how to actually do that. And we do still see a bit of anti-digital sentiment as well. So I don't think that's surprising to see. I think if you ask organizations to honestly reflect on where they are in their kind of digital transformation journey at the moment, I think people are still slightly towards the left in terms of maturity. So introducing these digital sales tools, I think the key moving forward is how do we actually integrate those sales tools.
Okay. No, that's great. And I think this actually speaks quite clearly to what Phil and what Bionicle sit with in terms of being able to captivate on potential here. So it's mentioned that we're working with multiple touch points here. Phil, do you have any insight as to immediate potential over some touch points that are being used and how to bridge the gap from one digital touch point to the next at Bionicle?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, being ex-client, but also now being on the server side for 3 years, I think there's a lot of talk about how you connect these different touch points across the customer journey. So I think a starting point for most people is just better planning from the start to look at what those different touch points should be and how they should interlink, as James says, and how they should integrate together. I think as people look between the field teams, the remote teams, the online digital things, it's how you better put that together in an ecosystem that really focuses on a better customer experience. And I think that's really the key to how you engage through those touch points. I'm not surprised that's the highest score, just because there's a lot of talk, a lot of conferences about it. And when I'm working with clients, both globally and locally, you hear this talked about a lot. So I think the key really from a Bionicle point of view when we're working with clients is really to work with the teams and the clients to understand how to better create that customer experience through those different touch points, put together different, let's say, customer journeys that will achieve the outcome or a better outcome.
No, that's a really good, valid point, and I think it also sort of speaks to what James was saying earlier, in that in the indications that we have here and what we see out there is that a lot of people are still in sort of early stages for doing this and pushing this forward. And they're leveraging good opportunities to be able to bridge these gaps is important, but accelerating the process and being able to not just move at the speed of life sciences, but begin to move at the speed of what we see out there in the consumer market is key there as well. And I was hoping that we could get some insights for Lars into what he's seen in terms of what's happening in terms of accelerating processes in our life science clients to be able to pick up the pace.
First, I'll just second what both James and Phil just mentioned. The concept of spraying a little digital onto your sales forces or sales efficiency focus seems to be a current methodology to how to move forward. And the acceleration is often, I'll just talk a little into the challenges now. The acceleration is often challenged by what we call the ecosystem or the technology map of the companies are trying to achieve. So often they are trying to that all-in-one solution that will feed you both your marketing automation services. They'll help you do social listening, but that's also going to help you engage directly with the customer whilst in front of them using different types of channels. So I think that that's one of the challenges that we see is that the investments that needs to be done are being done, but it's bits and pieces that are being invested in, and everybody hopes that they'll find that one single platform that's going to help them cover a whole huge range of activities that needs to be done.
No, and I think you're right, and those range of activities need to be kind of tied back to actual sales performance. In a study from Boston Consulting Group that looks at the revenue increases from a digital go-to-market, they speak to a 2 to 3% revenue increase from this effect alone. And James, sitting and consulting with your clients, do you see life sciences companies realizing this? Do they believe in it, or is this just something that they are behind the ball on?
I mean, the short answer is no. I think people are, as I said, broadly bought into the high-level vision of digital and the power of things like big data and artificial intelligence and those kind of things. And that's why every industry event you go to, you'll see people getting very excited about the topics, and then they bring that back, and there's a lot of discussion around it in meetings. But in terms of the actual realization of benefits, I don't think people are seeing that yet, particularly from a revenue perspective. And it is hard, right? When we talk about metrics here, how do you get really concrete, solid metrics for customer experience? That is a challenging thing to do. Obviously, you can measure sales, but that's not what it's about. Well, that's not what it's only about. So I think, I mean, in terms of the most important things that people need to do, and the reasons that these kind of things fall over is not having your strategy right in the first place. And I think that's perhaps why people are not realizing the benefits that they'd hoped for, because I mean, you need to have that strategic foundation in place so that everybody in the organization is clear on what you're doing and why you're doing it. So as Phil mentioned earlier, your strategy needs to be centered around your customer. So you're not just doing digital for the sake of it. So it's all very well. I mean, we've got this comment from BCG around the actual specific return on investment from revenue perspective. But I think a lot of organizations are not going to see that benefit unless they have got those strategic foundations set, and it's completely kind of customer centric. You need to know exactly who your customers are, and importantly, how they want to be engaged with. And then you can start thinking about a number of other things. But I think the reason I say that most companies are not seeing that revenue impact at the moment is because they are either not quite clear on their strategy, they may be going around the houses a bit in terms of resetting what they need to be doing, or just struggling with having lots of different bits of digital or lots of different tools, but not quite the integration that they need.
No, I think that's a really valid point, and yeah, we see that as well in terms of it's often a nice to have, but not always a need to have. But yeah, I think this kind of leads very nicely into our next polling question.
I mean, I can just make one more point there, which is I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised the remote score is low in the previous question, and that Lars mentioned about spraying digital across the field force. Of course, it's the easiest thing to be done because you currently have a group of field people, whether they be MSLs or key account managers, unless you decide as an organization to reduce those, which many organizations are, but it does make sense as a basic next step to try and enable them to have better digital tools to improve the customer experience. But I would challenge all of us to say, if you look at the consumer world, the retail land, and we tend to follow, they have experts in different channels. So they have experts in terms of their web and their websites, they have experts in terms of contact centers, whether it be your telecommunication companies or your shops like, pharmacy chains, and then they have their field teams as well. So they're experts in those areas, and it is difficult to always expect our field teams, whether MSLs or key account managers, to become, I suppose, everything and experts at everything. I suppose I challenge ourselves to look at, shouldn't you have excellence in integration of channels to drive a better customer experience rather than trying to get one channel to be good at many, many things?
Yeah, I think that's key to what we see with our studies in terms of where HCPs are going. And Laz, I think you could speak to this as well. That we see a youth movement in a lot of HCPs that are contacted on our engagement form, that they want a variety of different kinds of touch points. So I think that, Phil, you're hitting on something that's going to be a pull at some point that will lurch life sciences into the right direction when the sea changes happened in the HCP field, and that we have more digital natives on that end, then we'll speak to deliver to the channels that are most vital and relevant to them. But we're not all there yet, because we're, as you can see by this black and white photo, we're hitting our heads against the wall. There are barriers that are keeping us from implementing it. So I want to go ahead and ask all of you, good audience, as to what's the main reason that's keeping you from advancing this. Please go through as kindly as you have before, and give us some insight as where the responsibility lies. So, in looking at the numbers here from what's stopping this, yeah, it goes back to a bit of the point that James was supporting with that BCG point, lack of proof on ROI. So Phil, as a CSO that invests broadly in different kinds of technologies, what determines the return on investment at Bionicle in looking at the effectiveness of a technology choice?
I mean, just first to say, I'm not surprised again that this result, because it's very common. I'm sure James and Lars would also reiterate that point. I think we tend to look at the new innovative approaches and place a huge amount of pressure on the ROI for those, and don't always look at our current models. And I think one of the things we need to challenge ourselves with is challenging the current model and how effective that is in terms of ROI. And actually, so one of the things we would do at Bionicle, working with different clients, is to holistically look at the different channel mix that's out there being used currently to drive brand growth or maintain brand, let's say, patients on brands, is to say, what are they doing now? And look at those first of all. That's the first point. Secondly, in terms of remote engagement or hybrid or new channels, again, is to look at the key learning would be, this has been looking at this for the last 10 years, that you're not going to get it right first time. So you set some clear KPIs, looking at the outcomes first of all you're looking to achieve, but also some clear markers, as James said, around customer experience. So acceptance of the channel and retention of customers in the channel using new approaches. You tend to find, if you look at those, they provide you good KPIs to look at whether this channel is going to be accepted before you start to get the longer term outcomes. But I think it's important that you also get the change management right whilst you're doing this, and accept that you have to iterate as you go along, and that you won't achieve all the KPIs at the start. So I think the first point is really to challenge the concept of what you're doing now has a great ROI all the time. Secondly, to be very clear about what the quick wins are, the initial KPIs are you can work with. And thirdly, really to look at, actually, you need to iterate over time to achieve your longer term outcomes and goals. Maybe look at your customer experience, sort of early KPIs like the acceptance, the surveys, the feedback. And on the whole, for remotely detailed channels, whether it's in the UK or across markets, it has a very, very high and positive ROI. And to date, most of the time when it doesn't work, it's because it hasn't been set up right to win from the start. But on the whole, very rarely have seen it remotely detail or the hybrid models or the digital engagement that goes with it, as I call it, the glue between those human channels, not show positive ROI in most cases. I can give two very quick examples. One's a biologic, where we can clearly show that when you use remotely detail alone, without actually using any other key account management, field force presence, you can actually count the number of patients being put on a biologic in different hospitals. And number two, when you look at mass market drugs and also specialist care drugs in a very large multinational, for 3 years in a row, the remotely detailed channel has consistently outperformed the face-to-face channel. And that's been independently measured using commercial modeling outside our work.
Wow, that's really great. Is that something that you're seeing, James, with your interactions with top management? Because what we can see here as a poll result question is that we don't have top management buy-in to be able to push there. If there are great takeaways like Phil mentioned here, what's it going to take to be able to convince top management to bring this in as a priority?
Yeah, I think Phil mentioned some really great points there, and I think all of the topics mentioned here in the poll are real challenges for organisations when it comes to moving towards digitalisation. I mean, the first word that springs to mind for me when I think about blockers to digital adoption is culture. So I think if you don't have a culture where people are empowered to think differently, try new things, etc., then you won't move forward. I think, and that's increasingly true at a kind of top management level. I think it's very easy for management leadership to maintain the course when things seem to be going okay. But I mean, things were going okay for Blockbuster and Kodak, and we all remember how those turned out. I think on a more practical note, the reality is that kind of digitalization, adopting digital is hard. I mean, it's hard work. You need clear organizational direction. You need integrated channels, customer-centric content, a single view customer CRM, and top quality data. And a lot of that is very, very difficult to achieve. What I would say in terms of trying to help address these challenges is what we've seen at organizations who are doing this well. I think there are a number of enablers, if you like, which are helping organizations we work with implement digital technology. So first, I would say having some kind of roadmap for the digital change with well-sequenced change packages that enable you to deliver value in sprints. I think that's very important and very difficult, particularly for leadership to get their head around if they're used to a traditional way of rolling out change. But I think it is the importance of the leader and the manager cannot be underestimated. I think you have to set up for leader and manager-led change. So you have to get the right people involved to drive it. Everybody has to be on the bus, so to speak. Importantly, I think you have to equip people with the right capabilities as well. So once you've got the top management buy-in and that kind of solid strategy there, you have to actually give people the tools to succeed. So I'm talking about capabilities like customer buyer understanding, data and digital literacy, customer journey progression, those types of things. And then finally, I think, which links back to a number of the topics that we've covered already, is just the importance of measuring results constantly and dynamically course correcting when things aren't going wrong. Things are not going as planned. So I think Phil touched on that in terms of you've got to be willing to try things and fail and iterate constantly. You have to be able to act in an agile way. It's not just a case of, right, well, we tried digital, it failed, so we're not going to try it anymore. I think we have to be willing to be slightly more comfortable being uncomfortable, and being innovative and trying new things and failing and learning and moving forward. And I think you really, really need dedicated people who are accountable for kind of measuring the value for your customers but also your employees, and then obviously the commercial organization. And I think there's a few, we often talk about the importance of customer experience, and we often forget the importance of employee experience. And I think if we forget that if our employees are not having a good experience, it won't work, then we are setting ourselves up to fail. So I think, I mean, those are just a number of things that we've seen in terms of how you address some of these challenges.
No, and I really like your point as well of being able to speak to agile. Us as a technology company, yeah, we live, breathe, and eat agile in our daily sprints to be able to make the product better. Laz, in response to to those who are saying that lack of time and resources, how is it that our agile kind of approach can match client resources as they stand to be able to deliver a good digital experience kind of at any scale, large or small?
So an interesting question, and ties into what James and Phil, of course, just spoke about and brought some really interesting points on. What I really reflect on in terms of time and resources are also, if you look at some of the other poll numbers coming out of lack of top management support or buy-in, lack of ROI. And probably what that sort of stems to is the real lack of a clear KPI of why doing this. So I think that when I reflect across the different meetings that we're having, maybe especially within the sector of pharma, where there is an experience of having done well so far, having gotten by with what you have so far, realizing that the world is changing around you, but hesitating to move on. And I think it was Phil a little earlier who spoke about the lack of measuring successes within the traditional way of running the commercial organization, so the face-to-face meetings that have been going on forever. So I think it all ties into a bit of a Gothic knot in a sense that it's an issue that we don't have management support to change things. We're struggling with getting the clear KPIs so that we can prove to the top management that we're actually progressing, and therefore also difficult to find time, to find resources for these kind of investments. So I think it seems as if there is a lack of that culture that motivates and promotes change, agility, and pace, and it often feels a little like a Thelma and Louise scenario. Everybody is on the bus, everybody can see the cliff that we're about to drive off, but everybody is jolly singing along as we sort of move towards the edge of things. So I think that one of the things that needs to happen is we need for top management to be clear on what it is that they want to achieve from these kind of investments, and push that through the organization. Then ROIs and time and resources to do so is going to come by itself.
No, I think that's that's clear as well. And then when these kinds of metrics come into people's budgets, yeah, we'll start to see greater investments there. But it's before you can have any kind of good approach, yeah, you need a good form for measuring the results. So we're coming to our third poll question here now, and we're speaking to how are results measured using digital technology in engagements today. So I'm putting this out here to you and launching this this here. And in going back to what Phil had mentioned a bit earlier, you said that there needs to be kind of this model change. Like, are we seeing budgets change as a result of some of these model shifts? Like, are marketing budgets being allocated in different ways? So anybody who has any kind of answer to this, please chime in.
I think one of the key challenges is that a lot of these digital investments do sit under a marketing budget. And if you're looking to, medical marketing, if you're looking to really change the model, the biggest cost we know in pharma to date still is the is humans, it's people. So there needs to be that integrated assessment of overall the field budgets, whether that be again medical affairs or commercial, with marketing and medical budgets. And just recently, talking to a very large client in the UK, they mentioned that they're getting a heavy amount of challenge because the remote detail they're doing, and also some of the other digital work they're doing, being heavily challenged in their marketing spend. However, when they looked at actually the relative spend of that versus the actual field teams, it's very, very minor, or a much smaller percentage. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and I think that process needs to change in terms of being looked at a lot earlier in the planning processes, whether it's a 5-year plan or a yearly plan, so they can more holistically be overall spend against a brand, whether it be launch or mature product or a growth product. So that's one of the biggest barriers I come up against regularly, and also came up against when I was on the client side for a long period of time across multiple markets.
No, and that also seems to be the response from our listeners here today, who's given a smattering of responses kind of across the board here. So there's not a clear indicator from you, our public, as to how you're measuring results. It seems that you're doing it to adjust messaging, that it's happening to understand sales teams. It's of course going back to our form of a return on investment, to be able to track that. But this is quite interesting that pops out here as the outlier, is to segment our customers. And Lars, I was wondering if you could speak to how is it that we see that a digital approach can be used towards segmenting our customers.
Well, the result itself actually doesn't surprise me. So just speaking from some of the most recent cases that we've worked with here at Agnitio, where we've been using data collection within the actual, in this case, face-to-face customer engagements mainly, to validate the segmentation model chosen. So I think that it shows that definitely at the level of data usage at this point ties into the level of maturity. So back to what James said earlier, well, most of the companies within the life science as a whole have made those basic investments. They're past investing in a CRM platform, as an example. Within there, they've been doing their first data exercises, and as they start enriching those profiles within their CRM, we see technologies that needs to be implemented to be able to capture customer engagements and try and understand if customers are actually behaving in accordance to the segmentation that has been built. So I feel it ties very much into what we're seeing customers using our technology for, as in terms of the data, is to validate and understand your customer base. Short term, just to validate. Long term, because I think it ties into the fact that the commercial models that we see at customers now, where it's still the traditional face-to-face sales people we have, or field sales we have, there is an expectation that the segmentation model will break off into different segments that needs to be treated differently, both in terms of channels and how they're being engaged. So interesting to see that it supports what we see in daily life.
Yes, and I think that's it's quite a challenge, as James had mentioned before, because there are a lot of buzzwords that are out there in terms of how to attract the data question. It seems that people are looking for a magic bullet in terms of artificial intelligence and business intelligence systems just being able to lift this. But James, what can you speak to in terms of how data is being used to understand the sales process better? Are they basing this on a metric that they've always worked with, or are they developing new ones as the data comes in?
I mean, the question of data is a fascinating one to me, and you mentioned buzzwords there, and I think unfortunately within the life science industry, data is still a bit of a buzzword. I think conceptually, as with digital as a whole, people are bought into the concept that data is powerful. And I mean, it's good using data to segment your customers is great, because as a one of the primary steps, you need to understand who your customer base is. I think the key gap for me is what you do with the data. So I think organizations are starting to understand that data is really important, starting to collect a huge amount of data. But the missing link at the moment for me is, how do you actually take that data and turn it into insights, and then take that insight and turn it into action. So as I say, I think people get that data is important, but I think it's still a massive challenge for organizations. And I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to data and being able to actually harness the power of it is data quality. I think data quality is an issue for most organizations, and that needs to be addressed first. I was actually reading an interview with the CEO of Novartis the other week, and he was talking about how difficult it is to implement digital broadly. I mean, there's a number of topics covered, but as part of that interview, he was talking about the importance of data quality and the fact that they've actually spent years just cleansing data and making sure it's of a good quality. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because, I mean, ultimately, if you put rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. And I think that couldn't be more true when we talk about the potential from data. At the moment, I think, as I say, people are collecting it all. It's just what's not quite clear at the moment is what they're doing with it. Because I don't think, if we're really honest with ourselves, that the majority of organizations are able to really harness the power of the data that they're collecting. But the good thing about digital and data is that with digital, you can literally track almost everything. I mean, you can collect data from pretty much every interaction you have with customers. So I think this is where one of the biggest changes is going to be moving forward. But linking back to your earlier point, it's now just, how do we set the right metrics so we know that we're moving in the right way? But I think, I mean, I'm hoping that over the next few years that organizations will start to truly harness the power of data and really kind of connect the link between data and insight and action.
No, and I think that this bridges really quite nicely into what Bionicle is sitting with as a CSO in an operational sense, is as a field force and call center. And so in Phil, I was hoping that you could reflect a little bit on how data is supporting your relationship with your life science clients, and how the calls that you create and the conversions that you create on that affect your ongoing relationships with clients at Bionicle.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the great thing about a remotely detailed setup is that the amount of data you can collect versus the traditional model. So we can track everything from, obviously, the average time of a call, as you said, highlighted earlier, the time to get onto a call, the acceptance rate of people accepting these calls, but also another factor, and another case study is that recently we found that over 92% of customers that accept a remotely detailed call are also willing to still accept a face-to-face call, which is a very positive message, and vice so that going forward. And we can track that. We can track, obviously, with speech analytics now with one client, but also pulling out keywords that are mentioned across multiple calls as well, which is something which is very useful. The other thing we're looking at is sentiment. Going forward, again, working with a telephony company, but we can look at the tone of voice as well. So there are many things we can collect that you don't get all the time. I think the biggest thing about remotely detail is that we record all our calls, and because of that, traditionally some people commission audits to look at their field force effectiveness. You don't really have to do that anymore, because you can have all the calls recorded. Very, very few people, probably less than 1 in 100 customers will ever decline to be recorded, because it's now part of the norm. But you can have all those calls recorded, look through all those calls and look at how you can better improve in-call quality by looking at all their calls and all their engagements, as opposed to in the traditional model, having a sales coach go out with a key account manager maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month. So there are a lot of KPIs being collected, and the way we do with clients is to look at the acceptance of the channel when we're first starting with them, and they can report that back up to senior leaders. The feedback from customers, so after every call we have a customer survey. Not everyone completes that, but some of the feedback coming back, as you've highlighted earlier, will on the whole show very, very high acceptance and very, very positive feedback from the customer to this channel. So the great thing about these new channels and new approaches, you can measure many more things in a way than the traditional model. And the key is, though, to wade your way through the data and look at what's important as you look to adopt these new approaches. And so we work with clients in different ways. So when they're more mature and they've adopted remote ED tailors, so we have a client with over 20 remote ED tailors in one country alone, we will be much more mature about looking at the outcomes we're getting from those calls, and actually, sales outcomes and segments are looking at. Whereas when we start with a client, we might be looking at just simple measures of, is a call, are the calls being accepted by the customers? What's the feedback customer survey? So it's a very, very positive channel to adopt and try going forward versus the traditional model, which I still think has a place, but less of a place than it had 5 years ago.
No, and I think that brings us very nicely here to our final poll question. So when we're looking at the returns that we're getting from data in utilizing these new digital investments and these new channels, it's informing us to what's next. So, kind listeners, I'm going to post our final poll question here, and ask you all, what are you seeing in your company's go-to-market change over the next 2-3 years? We'll leave this going for a little bit and be able to see that is the future filled with buzzwords, or are they going to be like AI and virtual reality, or business or untested business intelligence, or is the future more tangible? So I think we have everybody here who's responded, and we're sharing here now. And wow, that's a pretty clear split right there. So we're seeing that our field reps are going to become multi-channel hybrid field reps. So are we? We're seeing that there's a low interest in adoption of remote currently from our second polling question that we had, but this is still on the horizon. I was hoping, Laz, that you could be able to speak as to this multi-channel hybrid rep model. Are these so are these people out there now and not activated, or are they hoping to hire them here in the future and find these profiles in the next 2-3 years?
I'd say that first and foremost, to the number, I could agree. I could probably put 100 to it even, because I think that 100% of the customer meetings that we're having here at Ignitio, the field rep versus the new what's typically mentioned as the hybrid rep is always the discussion point. So are they out there right now? To be honest, no, they're not, or they're just sort of beginning to pop up here and there, where we've seen the first, especially perhaps pharma companies daring to spread new type of recruitments into their product launches, where they are now picking people perhaps directly out of university to be able to run this. So it comes down to capabilities, skills from the rep. What are they able to do? How are they able to communicate? How comfortable are they using tablets, using different types of technologies on a tablet? And that comfortness is what leads the way into launching hybrid reps. But as such, I think that we're engaged in discussions with significantly high number of companies that are right now discussing what is it that a hybrid rep does. Is a hybrid rep a rep that sits and just has moved away from the face-to-face? Do we keep the commercial model of having field sales, but focusing that on, you could call it key account management only? And back to the segmentation model, are there layers of our segmentation model that we are covering differently, either by allowing the rep to make their own decisions on how to visit, or do we roll out 100% the model of remote meeting? So recognizing the numbers that we see from customer meetings, absolutely.
So Phil, you are working with teams that have boots on the ground. In terms of your recruiting at Bionicle, are you seeing a capable field reps in your recruiting now to be able to handle this, or is this still something that's that's a bit away.
There are some that can make it. I mean, I suppose over the 8-9 years, both on the client side and now on the server side, it's very hard to see. I suppose more if you get more than 10% of the current field force, maybe 15-20% if you're lucky, that can turn into really truly the best multi-channel hybrid reps. I'd be surprised, given a lot of case studies, a lot of conversations we have to date. I'm not surprised. It's as I said earlier, it's one of the basic areas to start by encouraging the field reps to be more multi-channel. For a lot of clients, that means being able to send out more approved email after every call. Again, those rates tend to be a lot lower than remote detail reps who tend to be sitting at home or in office space, but that's definitely something to encourage as another touch point with the customer. But I'd say it's quite hard to take your current field force on the whole and expect them to be experts at remote detail or using digital engagement, as well as being great in the face-to-face call. And just to give you some examples, you tend one client that published at another conference, they had very, very low, what I call content platform rates. So when they did use remote detail, these field force reps in a multi-channel approach, they probably managed 5-10% of their calls using content. Vice versa, if you're using a remote detail representative, we have content platform sharing rates between 45 and 80% of all our calls. And with one very large client, we have in specialist care, 80%, it would be 80 to 90% of all the calls that are made are using a content sharing platform, so the actual doctor, consultant, specialist can actually see data being shown. That's unheard of when you look at the rates that people might see for ID delayed rates being used across the Viva CRM system in the past, or even now. So I think it's a challenge. I think it's a basic next step to try and do, but there needs to be some realism about making that work. Again, I would challenge all of us to look at the consumer world of retail and banking, telecommunications, and say they have experts in channels, and then they overlap those channels to create a better experience. And maybe that's another approach to be considered alongside what's being done now. I do think there is a place for hybrid representatives, and my view is that my opinion would be that should be much more remote to start with, and face-to-face is the value-add follow-up, rather than having someone work 4 days a week in the field and maybe spend 1 day or half a day sitting at home making remote calls or using email.
No, I think that's a great point to bring up, to be able to reflect the growing needs of our increasingly digital workforce. But it's going to take a great deal of investment, and I was hoping that, James, if there's a technology out there that you've come across with Black Dot, and you could invest in a single area, what would be, you think, your best bet in terms of return?
It's a good question, and I probably wouldn't say, if I was going to focus on one thing, it would just be one specific technology. I think, from my perspective, that the next 2 to 3 years, if we're talking digital go-to-market perspective, is really about the move to become omni-channel, data-driven organizations. So, right now, as we've said a number of times, we've got people experimenting with digital. They're maybe starting to align their key channels and systems, but progress has ultimately been relatively slow, and organizations are clearly still mostly reliant on their field force and that traditional face-to-face channel. So where I think we're likely to see the shift is towards truly integrated customer-centric engagement and data-driven optimization. So this means kind of augmented, personalized experience across all channels, customer-centric process, which are driven by the engagement analytics. And then obviously you've got these data-enabled intelligent reps who orchestrate this omni-channel machine. Coming back to your question, I think if I were to focus on one thing, it would probably be change leadership. I think we need to prioritize the right interventions and communicate the benefits to make sure that leaders and frontline staff across all the customer-facing roles are engaged, and that they actually adopt and ultimately role model the change. I think it's also important to reiterate that the transformation has to be anchored on the experience that customers value. So we can never forget that. I think it's easy to get excited about this multi-channel rep and all the different technologies that they might be able to use, but we can never forget that everything we should be doing has to be anchored around experiences that customers value. I think, I mean, the question probably depends on where an organization is on their maturity journey, as we mentioned. I think if someone's slightly further down the line and the organization's already bought into the strategic direction of this digital change, then I would probably suggest investment in improving data quality, as I mentioned earlier, and then integration across channels. I think organizations are collecting a hell of a lot of data. They've got a number of different channels and they're excited about the concept of multi-channel reps. They want to connect marketing and sales, but at the moment that just isn't happening. We need top quality data and we need channels that are properly talking to each other and fully integrated. Organizations need to kind of set up to have that single view of the customer, because once you have that, then you'll be able to leverage the data and transform the way you engage with customers.
No, I think that the question about engaging in customers and being able to give end customers a better sense of value is key here. But there are often competing elements at play within life science organizations, and that still comes up within our survey results here. The classic split between the rift between marketing and sales. That we see that the promise of we could see that the hope from our listeners here is that the promise of digital technology will connect these marketing and sales. Phil, what are you seeing to be able to leverage this opportunity to be able to break down those barriers in digital channels that you work with at Bionicle?
I mean, I think, like James, I agree that the biggest focus needs to be change leadership, and you need where we're finding that the largest disruption in digital space with most clients is where you have brave leaders that are willing to take risk and try things, and when they do try, as we've all highlighted, is to keep iterating and not think actually it didn't work in the first 3 to 6 months or a year, and keep working with it. There's a lot of belief that that this will work eventually, and how to make it work. So for me, it's the message would be, encouraging leaders to take that brave decisions, and people online being energized to go back and challenge the leaders and find those quick wins that show that this will work over time and will progress. And I think those companies that have done that have shown that actually long term they're going to get the best outcomes. So this is the way. This is the future. We know it's the direction of flow. I think if we challenge ourselves yet again, we adopt digital in our day-to-day lives. Doctors do it as well, nurses, etc., all the healthcare professionals, payers, etc. And we need to look at it and think, what's the best way to do that? And again, as James has highlighted, having very clear strategy, having brave leadership, putting change leadership in place, and then trying and taking those risks and then iterating as you go along. And then eventually you will get those outcomes.
No, and I like that very much, and I think that actually closes on something that I wanted to leave every of our listeners here with a bit today. And I know that we're talking a lot about change leadership and about having the right kinds of leadership in place, but I wanted to be able to draw upon an analogy that that a lot of people can identify with. So this quote people have seen a lot of times before, and when we're talking about KPIs, we're talking about a success that a lot of people can attest to. So that these kind of KPIs are owned by different kinds of stakeholders, and when that happens, a victory emerges. But the origin of this quote is actually quite funny. John F. Kennedy actually came out and said this as an answer to the failure of the Bay of Pigs, a military fiasco that happened in the 1960s. And it highlights that defeat is an orphan. So that there could be no one who could be attributed to the failure of that organization. But it was but he's still highlighted as a inspirational leader and as a forward-thinking leader because he recognized the victory of the movements that he championed spread across different stakeholders and organizations. And if we, I think, as digital leaders in working within life sciences, be able to take ownership of different KPIs and be able to bring them forward, and we can bring this to a victorious state and move from the left hand of the curve forward into the right hand. So everybody, I want to thank you very much for your participation today. We've had a very, very good active audience and a very great active group of panelists today. I'd like to thank Phil from Bionicle and James from Black Dot. And if you do have any questions that were raised that weren't raised here today that you want addressed, or if you have any kind of feedback for us to be able to continue to address some of the issues that were raised here, or are topics that you want to be addressed in the future, reach out. I'm here, and I'd love to be able to hear from you so that we can continue having a great, informative, interactive panels today. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time, and thank you, listeners, for your time and interaction. We couldn't do this without you.